Warning, this fic contains many dark and adult themes. For the full list provided by the author, please check the description below and proceed with caution. Welcome back, this is Sectumsempra by Severitus 812, JessalynMichele, Book 2 of Harry Potter and 7 Years of Chaos. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy, and subscribe for future stories. Please check the description for a full list of tags, and the link to drop a kudos for the original author. With that out of the way, let's get started. Chapter 9, Halloween PT 2. You've killed her, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. Severus rounded a corner, attempting to skulk his way to the astronomy tower when he instead was faced with Argus Filch, grabbing at his student, in front of what seemed to be the entire castle. Bang! In front of 100 student witnesses, Albus Dumbledore, and half a dozen other professors, Severus Snape hit Argus with a spell to forcibly remove him from Potter's face, where he had been screaming his death threats. The fact that his spell caused Argus to slam into the opposite wall and acquire a minor laceration was of no consequence to him. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed at the caretaker. "Harry Potter's gone and killed my cat, my Mrs. Norris," Argus howled, glaring angrily past Severus towards Potter. Severus turned and saw Potter standing beside Susan Bones and Luna Lovegood. He checked him carefully, but aside from an unhealthy pallor to his face and a slight shake to his limbs, he seemed unhurt. He slid his eyes over and saw as Albus detached the mangy cat Argus owned from a torch bracket. There was also graffiti painted on the wall. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." That cannot possibly be good." His subtle but probing glance at Potter received an infinitesimal shake of the boy's head. Potter hadn't done this. "Come with me, Argus," Albus said to Filch. "You too, Mr. Potter, Miss Lovegood, Miss Bones." Gilderoy stepped forward eagerly. "My office is nearest, Headmaster, just upstairs. Please feel free." "Thank you, Gilderoy," said Dumbledore. Severus curled his lip as he followed behind the others, Minerva squaring her shoulders in stride beside him. They entered Gilderoy's office, and Severus very nearly lost his composure then and there. The vanity of the man was incomprehensible. There were at least 20 photos, paintings, and what seemed to be a charmed tea kettle, all plastered with Gilderoy's image across them. Disgusting. As Severus gazed around with disdain, Albus began studying and prodding Argus, dead cat. "It was definitely a curse that killed her, probably the transmogrifian torture. I've seen it used many times, so unlucky I wasn't there. I know the very counter-curse that would have saved her." Severus could not decide which was more irritating in that moment of time. Gilderoy's inane ramblings, Argus, heaving sobs, Minerva and Albus, mutterings, or Potter's pale face and flickering gaze, which never once settled on Severus, which rendered him unable to better judge the child's current mental state. Luna Lovegood was, for once, the least annoying person in the room. Severus would never admit it, but he was actually quite fond of the little mad witch. She was an exceptional potioneer who followed the safety rules and guidelines to the very letter. She also always seemed to be willing to assist the less able members of her house, not that they allowed her an opportunity to assist them, but Severus appreciated it nonetheless. "I remember something very similar happening in Ouagadougou," Gilderoy blathered, his voice breaking through Severus' thoughts like a sharp knife. "A series of attacks, the full story, in my autobiography. I was able to provide the townsfolk with various amulets, which cleared the matter up at once." The images of Gilderoy on the walls were all nodding in agreement as he talked. Severus saw Potter edging away from a particularly vicarious painting that had on a hairnet and was winking at the child. At last Dumbledore straightened up. "She's not dead, Argus," he said, softly to the caretaker. Gilderoy stopped abruptly, in the middle of counting the number of murders he had prevented. Praise Merlin. Severus held no love for Argus nor his cat. He was simply pleased that something finally caused Gilderoy to stop speaking. "Not dead," choked Argus, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris, "but why she all stiff and frozen?" "She has been petrified," said Albus. "I thought so," said Gilderoy, "but how I cannot say." "Ask him," shrieked the mad caretaker, turning his blotched and tear-stained face to Potter. Severus gave him a cold look and took a small step closer to Potter. If the man so much as twitched in Potter's direction, he would find himself as stunned as his cat apparently was. "I didn't do anything, I swear," Potter defended himself. "I just found her on the wall like that." Albus turned his blue eyes to Potter, his face uncharacteristically solemn. Harry, I need the absolute truth. Have you done anything recently that you wish to speak with me about? We can find a more private venue if you'd like to explain, he added, glancing at the witches flanking either side of Potter. Severus was about to defend the child when he was beat to it by Luna Lovegood. Don't be silly, she giggled, her blue eyes drifting around the room languidly. Harry isn't a real snake. That was the only thing Severus did not appreciate about the girl. When she did speak, it was typically nonsensical statements such as that. Of course, Potter was a real Slytherin. No other student had ever embodied the house as well as he. Severus watched carefully as Albus intensified his gaze on Potter, opting to ignore the tiny blonde witch. Harry, he prodded firmly, is there anything you wish to tell me? Severus had a feeling of foreboding at the headmaster's intense gaze. Surely he was not attempting to legitimize a 12-year-old minor without consent in a room full of witnesses. Nothing, sir, Potter spat, though I'm starting to get a headache, he added with a subtle twitch of his left index finger. Which Severus believed was Potter code for, yes, Albus is absolutely attempting to legitimize a 12-year-old with nearly impenetrable mental barriers. If I may speak, headmaster, Severus cut in smoothly, Potter and his friends were undoubtedly in the wrong place, in the wrong time. Miss Bones gave Severus a small smile, seemingly pleased by his defense. Why were you not at the feast? Albus inquired quietly, directing his question solely on to Potter. We went to Sir Nicholas' death day party, sir, Miss Bones said. And afterwards, Albus prodded, I do not believe any of you would have passed this corridor to reach either your common rooms nor the Great Hall. Severus felt his wand hand tense slightly, as Albus continued attempting to corner Potter in a lie. Harry isn't feeling well, Miss Lovegood said softly. He wanted to find Professor Snape, and the Nargles said that he would be looking at the stars soon. Minerva glanced at him and raised a single brow. Severus scowled in response. He had actually been headed to the astronomy tower to relax. The 31st of October was always a terrible night for him, and he rarely felt like spending the evening in his isolated dungeon room, though he couldn't imagine how Lovegood knew this, nor what on earth Nargles are meant to be. Is this the truth, Harry? Dumbledore asked. Yes, sir. Potter lowered his head and shifted his feet around. I just wanted to ask for a potion, you know. I didn't think I'd sleep too good tonight with it being the anniversary and all. He let out a slight sniffle, and Miss Bones rubbed his back gently. As terribly false as Severus was sure the story was, it was also masterful. Minerva looked at the small boy with pity shining clearly on her face, and Albus had regained a slight twinkle to his eyes. The boy is lying, Argus shrieked. My cat has been petrified and I want him punished. His name is not Boy, Severus hissed. After his immersive trip down Potter's traumatic memory lane, he would never be able to hear anyone refer to the child as Boy without feeling his stomach recoil. He would sooner call him James than he would Boy. Potter inched slightly backwards, moving closer to Severus. Apparently his irritation at being protected from himself did not extend to irritation at protection from others. We will be able to cure her, Argus, said Albus. Professor Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they have reached their full size, I will have a potion made that will revive Mrs. Norris. I'll make it, Gilderoy buted in. I must have done it 100 times. I could whip up a mandrake restorative draught in my sleep. Severus was about to inform the idiotic, stupid, thick-skulled, infuriating man what he thought of him attempting to fulfill Severus' role when. I believe Professor Snape is the highest-ranking and youngest ever potions master in the United Kingdom, Potter said icily. The three professors stared at Potter in momentary silence. Minerva had a slight smile in the corner of her lips. Gilderoy was turning a satisfying shade of red at the dressing down, and Severus was gazing down at Potter's head, blinking roughly. Never had he been so vehemently defended since Lily. Even at the time of his arrest, Albus' defense, while adequate, had not had that much heat behind it. Yes, apparently he was quite forgiven for making the cardinal mistake of treating Potter as if the traumas of his past may impact his present-day mental health. You may go, Albus said to Potter, Bones, and Lovegood. If any of you, he gave a look of significance to Lovegood and Bones, later recall any information that may assist us with the matter, please come speak with me immediately. Miss Bones must have seen through the thinly veiled message, because she scowled at Albus before making a show of gripping Potter's hand and pulling him from the room, Lovegood trailing behind them. Once the door closed behind them, Minerva turned to Albus. Do you think it is possible, she asked, I believe, Albus glanced quickly at Minerva and Severus, that we should leave Gilderoy and Argus to the rest of their night. Argus, please take Mrs. Norris to your quarters. She can rest comfortably until Severus and Poppy have procured the restorative draught. Good night, gentlemen. With a small gesture of farewell, Albus made for his office. Severus followed him, as he was sure the man wished him to, along with Minerva. When they passed the spot where the cat had been hanging, Severus looked again at the message on the wall. The Chamber of Secrets shone in blood-red letters. Severus prayed that no student linked the legendary chamber to the House of Slytherin. His snakes were already unfairly discriminated against, and this would only increase the prejudice against them. Come, Albus murmured after sighing unhappily towards the wall. There is much to be discussed. When Severus left the headmaster's office, it had reached nearly midnight. Albus spun a story to them that Minerva had been partially aware of, and Severus not at all. Tom Riddle had located and opened the Chamber of Secrets once before. He had commanded a monster within the chamber to attack his fellow students and ultimately killed one. It did give Severus a moment of regret to know that Rubeus, the gentle giant, had lost his chance to complete his magical training based on the manipulations of a teenage Dark Lord, though Rubeus should not have harbored creatures such as Acromatula within a castle full of students. It seemed now as if either the events of the past were unfolding again, or, as Severus had argued and fervently hoped to be true, a student was playing a malicious Halloween prank. He recalled how Albus had commented on his suspicions of Potter. Do keep an eye on him, won't you? He would certainly be keeping an eye on Potter. The last thing the child needed was to become wrapped up once again in suspicious circumstances in Albus' theories. He would have to find Potter tomorrow and warn. What in Merlin's name are you doing here, you foolish child? It seemed as if Potter had found him. He was leaning against Severus' door, a wild look to his eyes. It wasn't me, he said immediately. Please, I swear I didn't do it. You have to believe me. Potter was ranting and seemed to be deeply unsettled. Quiet, Potter, follow me. Severus made to enter the door to his private quarters and saw that Potter was standing stiffly, his eyes flicking between the door and Severus rapidly. You require a calming draught, I require a headache reliever. Come along, he prodded him. Potter slowly shuffled up beside Severus, though maintaining a slight distance. Severus opened his private entrance and waved him inside. He went to his store to grab the required potions, leaving Potter to gaze around uncertainly. Here, he said, thrusting a lavender-colored potion towards Potter. Drink this, then explain why you are outside my door at midnight needlessly protesting for your innocence to me. He was momentarily impressed by Potter's trust in him, as he drank the potion quickly. The child's trembling limbs ceased, and he let out a heavy sigh of relief. Can I sit, sir? He asked in a quiet voice. Certainly. Severus guided him to his sofa and watched as Potter slumped down onto the seat. Why were you in that corridor? He asked the child. I didn't do it, Potter said, evading the question. I didn't attack that cat, and I didn't open the Chamber of Secrets. I believe you, he said simply. I do not believe you needed to wait outside my office to convince me of this. Potter pushed his glasses up and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture of irritation he likely gained from Severus, as amusing as that was. When I got back to the dorm, everyone was weird, Potter said. They were acting like they were scared of me. Even Theo was acting weird. I told them I'm not the heir of Slytherin, but nobody listened. Severus attempted to find a way to word his question, without using the word feelings. And why did that unsettle you? He asked. I believed you found the fear of your housemates to be emboldening. Potter shrugged. It's different when they're scared of me because of something I actually did, then I wanted it and earned it. This time they're scared of me for something someone else did. And Potter hesitated and squinted hard at the floor. It's different. They're not just scared, it's like they're impressed, or they think I'm some hero for killing a little cat. The cat is alive, Severus reminded him gently. And with a little bit of luck, this whole evening will be proven to have been a ridiculous prank, and your housemates will once again treat you with the terror you have earned. Potter grinned at him before yawning hugely. You should go to sleep, Potter, he told him, not unkindly. Things will undoubtedly look better in the morning. Potter agreed quietly and thanked him for the potion before leaving his quarters. Severus prayed that this would be a horrible prank and that his advice would not be unfounded. He truly could not have foreseen the events that would soon take place within the castle. Chapter 10: The Quidditch Match. If Harry had ever experienced a more miserable week at Hogwarts, he couldn't recall it. Since Halloween night in just 7 days, Harry had been tripped, shoved, smacked, and hissed at more in the corridors than he ever had before. On one memorable occasion, someone had shoved Harry so hard he'd smacked the stone wall of the corridor and had to ask Susan to fix his broken glasses. His magic never worked as well when he was on edge, and he'd been on edge all week. The students all whispered about him as well. There he is. I heard he hates Muggle-borns. I heard he's been attacking students since day one. The boy who lived is Slytherin's heir. Guess we know how he beat you-know-who. It didn't seem to matter to anyone how much he said he wasn't the heir of Slytherin, they hated him anyway. And he thought he'd been used to people hatting him. The Dursleys certainly did, but to be hated for something he didn't do, it strung. The other ones who didn't hate him were the other Slytherins, and he didn't really like the way they acted either. They were treating him like he was some hero of their house. Even Parkinson had tried to talk to him, not that she got a chance. Ron jinxed her hair yellow, and she ran away in tears. His friends were the only people treating him normally. Theo seemed a touch more nervous when he talked to Harry, but he hoped that would fade with time. The other kids assured him they believed him, and still talked with him in class, and studied together like they always had. I'm going to drop out, Harry muttered in one of their study sessions, after having Colin Creevey shriek at the sight of him, and run out of the library. Ron gave him a sympathetic look, but Draco looked scandalized. You can't quit, how would you learn magic? We could go to Botabans, Blaise suggested with a grin, and be surrounded by pretty French girls. He waggled his brows at Harry. Ooh, or we could transfer to Ilvermorny, Ron added eagerly. I've heard that they don't hide their magic in the States nearly as much as we do. Theo snorted. America is a joke, he said dryly, not even looking up from his parchments. They don't hide their magic because everyone there is mad. Sounds like your kind of place, Blaise winked at Harry. He recognized what his friends were doing, and gave them a small grin. People will find out the truth soon, Neville whispered. Yeah, Harry muttered. The boys all worked on their homework in silence for a while, until they were interrupted by the arrival of an excited Hermione and Susan. Guess what? Hermione said as Susan scooted into a seat beside Harry. What's up? Ron asked her. We just had history of magic, Susan whispered to them, shooting a careful look around their empty section of the library, and guess what Professor Binns told us? Goblins bad, Wixen good, wars are bloody, Theo asked with a small smirk. Nope, Hermione said, sitting down between Blaise and Draco. Well, yes, but he told us the legend about the Chamber of Secrets. Oh, the boys all sat up straight, leaning towards Hermione eagerly. Go on then, Blaise said. What'd he say? He said that the founders, Helena Hufflepuff, Godric Gryffindor, Salazar Slytherin and Rowena Ravenclaw, used to work in harmony together. Hermione's likely perfect recital of Binns' information was cut off by an impatient Susan. He said Salazar Slytherin created a chamber just for him and his future heirs, and put a monster in it to be used to purge the school of unworthy students, she summarized quickly. Harry thought it was probably a good thing he wasn't the heir. If he had control of Slytherin's monster, he'd use it. The next person who pushed him would regret it immediately if he did. Sue Muggleborns, Ron asked quietly. Draco and Hermione nodded, but Theo looked thoughtful. Or anyone who doesn't fit Salazar's ideals, he said slowly. I mean, the Sorting Hat wouldn't put Muggleborns in our house if the founder thought they weren't worthy to learn magic. Nobody who isn't resourceful and cunning, Blaise added. That makes more sense. Are there Muggleborns in Slytherin? Neville asked hesitantly. Tracy in our year, Susan said immediately. Harry had a suspicion that Susan was on a first-name basis with every student in their year. And Emily in 4th year, Blaise added. Hermione looked uncomfortable, and Harry was suddenly reminded that she was the only Muggle-born at their table, so he hastily changed the subject. Are you ready for practice tomorrow? He asked Draco. As he'd hoped, the subject of the upcoming opening Quidditch match between Slytherin and Gryffindor drew everyone in. They argued and debated on tactics and the odds, and the subject of Muggleborns and monsters was put to rest for a while. Of course, as Harry skidded to a halt at practice the next evening, late and with a bloodied nose, the subject wouldn't stay at rest. This is ridiculous, Flint spat after seeing Harry. Who did it this time? Dunno, Harry mumbled, shamed by his own weakness. They snuck up on me then ran off, didn't they? He was pretty sure it had been a few older Ravenclaw boys, though. It was hard to be positive when you were being shoved into a wall. It was harder to hit back then, too. "Everyone, come here now," Flint called, blowing sharply on his whistle. The rest of the team landed, and Draco immediately came to Harry's side. "Go to Snape," he said, his grey eyes stormy and fierce. "Or curse them." "Or kill M," one of the other chasers, Warrington, said. "Then I'm expelled and they win," Harry scowled. "Dumbledore's already watching me." He'd noticed the headmaster staring intently at him during meals, and even in the halls sometimes. His intense stares were usually accompanied by a quiet presence prodding into his mind, which he closed each time with a vicious snarl towards the old man. Hermione said it was illegal to legitimize a minor without their consent, but clearly, as usual, Harry seemed to be the exception to the rules. "New plan," Flint announced. "Potter goes nowhere alone tonight or before the game tomorrow. The last thing we need is to be down a seeker because Potter's too noble to hit back." "We'll be down a seeker permanently if Dumbledore bans him from playing or expels him," Draco sneered. "A fight between a Slytherin and Gryffindor, who do you think is going to be punished?" The rest of the team murmured in agreement. They were all too aware of the prejudice against their house. "Either way, Potter, you are to have 2 people with you at all times. Quidditch members only, got it? I don't care if they put you in the hospital after the match, but until then I need you," Flint said. Harry glared at him but nodded silently. He didn't need bodyguards, he wasn't weak, but he did need witnesses. After setting up a schedule, Draco offered to be one of the ones with him at all times. Flint had them all in the air for 2 hours of hard practice. Harry was relieved to have an intense practice. All he had to do was fly and focus on the snitch. All his constantly swirling thoughts stayed on the ground. He never felt as free as he did when he was in the air. Unfortunately, as soon as he landed and walked back to the castle with the team, he could feel that familiar edge creeping back up. It was different being surrounded by his teammates as they made their way through the castle. Even the ones who didn't like him, like Flint, still gave nasty looks at every person they passed. He didn't know if it was because they thought he was the heir or because they didn't want to lose their seeker. He supposed it didn't really matter. No one had the bullocks to harass him when he was surrounded by a wall of green. He could still feel the edges, but they were a little softer now. Soft enough for him to make a decision. The next person who touched him was going to regret it, Dumbledore be damned. He wasn't going to be a victim to a bunch of posh prats who thought they could hurt him. He wasn't going to be scared of them. He was stronger and more powerful, they had no idea. Harry woke early on Saturday morning and lay for a while thinking about the coming Quidditch match. He was nervous, mainly at the thought of what Flint would say if they lost, but also at the idea of facing a team from the house that seemed to be attacking him the hardest. After half an hour of lying there with his insides churning, he got up, dressed, and waited in the common room for Draco and Flint to head to breakfast. His outlook for the day brightened considerably when he saw all his friends, including Luna Lovegood, waiting at the Slytherin table wearing green scarves and hats. Well, Neville wasn't wearing any green, but that was to be expected since they were playing his house. "Harry, Draco," Susan squealed, "are you so excited? Nervous?" "Hungry and ready to win," Draco said, filling a plate. "Oh, you'll win," Luna said confidently. Hermione scoffed because the Nargles told you so, she said skeptically. Luna ignored her hateful tone and smiled serenely. "No, because Harry and Malfoy are the best players in the castle." Harry grinned at her as he poured a cup of coffee and Draco turned rather pink. "Thanks, Luna," he said, puffing his chest out proudly. "Call me Draco, please." As 11 o'clock approached, the whole school started to make its way down to the Quidditch stadium. It was a muggy sort of day with a hint of thunder in the air. Their friends walked with them until it was time for the boys to enter the locker rooms. "Make sure you beat Gryffindor, okay?" Ron said seriously. "I bet the twins that you would win." "We will," Draco said, "but then you have to split your winnings with us." Harry entered the locker room still laughing at Ron's gobsmacked expression. Draco was excellent at exploiting deals. He probably learned from his dad. The team pulled on their green Slytherin robes, then sat down to listen to Flint's pre-match pep talk. "Listen up," he called. "I don't care what anyone else says, we've been the winning team for the last 8 years now, and I don't expect to start losing today." The team all clapped. Nobody wanted to lose their streak of getting the Quidditch Cup. "We have the better brooms," Flint continued, "but more importantly we have the better players. So let's go out there and show them that we could kick their arses on any broom, any field, any day of the week." Everyone cheered loudly, energized by their captain's speech. They entered the field, looking impeccable in their robes with their matching brooms, and got in position. "I want a nice clean match," Madam Hooch, the Quidditch referee, said sternly to Flint and the Gryffindor captain, Oliver Wood. Flint and Wood shook hands, giving each other threatening stares and gripping rather harder than was necessary. "On my whistle," said Madam Hooch. 3, 2, 1. With a roar from the crowd to speed them upward, the 14 players rose toward the leaden sky. Harry flew higher than any of them, squinting around for the snitch. A heavy black bludger was almost immediately knocked in his direction. He had to dive quickly to avoid being crushed. "I'll try again, Potter." One of Ron's brothers, either Fred or George, flew by after the bludger and winked at him. Flint had warned him that the other teams would try and get him out first. Luckily, they had spent quite a few hours during practice, every week of Harry dodging bludgers. He suspected the beaters enjoyed hitting them towards him more than they were supposed to. He shook his head and got back to searching for the snitch. Harry felt heavy drops fall onto his face, splattering onto his glasses. He didn't have a clue what was going on in the rest of the game until he heard Lee Jordan, a fourth-year Gryffindor who was commentating, say, "Slytherin led, 60 points to 0. "Make my glasses impenetrable," he thought fiercely, hopping for some sort of break to be able to see. Thankfully, his spell seemed to have worked. His glasses cleared, and he was able to see once again. Unfortunately, as soon as he turned in the air, he had to dodge. Yet another bludger aimed his way. "Go higher," Adrian Pusey, one of the team's beaters, yelled at him as he hit the bludger towards the Gryffindor seeker. Harry flew up higher, cheering loudly when he heard Draco scored 2 more goals for Slytherin. They were up 80-20, he needed to find the snitch. He saw the Gryffindor seeker make a steep dive, and his stomach dropped as he recognized the glint of gold the other boy was chasing after. Harry immediately dove down for the snitch, ignoring the noises of the other players and the crowd. All that mattered was grabbing that golden ball. He leaned forward on his broom and urged it faster. He was nearly neck and neck with the Gryffindor boy. The snitch was so close. Harry stretched his arm out to grab it and... Bam! He let out a gasp of pain when a bludger made contact with his outstretched arm. Harry could hear Flint howling for a foul on the Gryffindor beater, but it didn't matter because... Yes! Harry grabbed the snitch and held it high with his left arm. His right was now dangling uselessly at his side. He tried to land using just his legs, but wound up falling from his broom. He heard a yell from the crowd as he fell, and Lee Jordan, bitterly, announcing Slytherin's win. With a splattering thud, he hit the mud and rolled off his broom. His arm was hanging at a very strange angle. Riddled with pain, he heard, as though from a distance, a good deal of whistling and shouting. He focused on the snitch clutched in his good hand. And he fainted. He came around, rain falling on his face, still lying on the field with someone leaning over him. He saw a glitter of teeth. "Oh no, not you," he moaned. "Doesn't know what he's saying," said Lockhart loudly to the crowd of Slytherins pressing around them. "Not to worry, Harry, I'm about to fix your arm." "Don't fucking touch me," he moaned. "I'll do it myself." He grit his teeth and focused on his magic. "Fix my arm. Heal the bone." Nothing happened. This wasn't the first time his magic refused to work. It was harder to channel it when he was blinking away white spots of pain. He tried to sit up, but the pain was terrible. He heard a familiar clicking noise nearby. "If you keep taking my photo, I'm going to kill you," he said loudly, looking towards the first-year Gryffindor with the camera, Creevy. "Lie back, Harry," said Lockhart soothingly. "It's a simple charm I've used countless times." "I'll go to Snape," said Harry through clenched teeth. "I'll get him, Harry," said a muddy Draco, who couldn't help grinning even though his friend was injured. "Great catch, Harry, I knew you'd do it." "Snape now," he told Draco. On it, Draco took off sprinting through the crowd. Through the thicket of legs around him, Harry heard Fred and George Weasley apologizing to Ron. "Accident, mate." "Tell that to Harry," he heard Ron snort. "Stand back," said Lockhart, who was rolling up his jade-green sleeves. "No, don't," said Harry weakly, fighting back the urge to faint again, but Lockhart was twirling his wand and a second later had directed it straight at Harry's arm. A strange and unpleasant sensation started at Harry's shoulder and spread all the way down to his fingertips. It felt as though his arm was being deflated. He didn't dare look at what was happening. He had shut his eyes, his face turned away from his arm, but his worst fears were realized as the people above him gasped and Creevy began clicking away madly. His arm didn't hurt anymore, nor did it feel remotely like an arm. "Ah," said Lockhart. "Yes, well, that can sometimes happen, but the point is the bones are no longer broken. That's the thing to bear in mind. So Harry, just toddle up to the hospital wing, and Madame Pomfrey will be able to, tidy you up a bit." As Harry got to his feet, he felt strangely lopsided. Taking a deep breath, he looked down at his right side. What he saw nearly made him pass out again. Poking out of the end of his robes was what looked like a thick, flesh-colored rubber glove. He tried to move his fingers. Nothing happened. Lockhart hadn't mended Harry's bones, he had removed them. "I'm going to kill you," he hissed. He felt a stab of satisfaction as Lockhart paled slightly and took off quickly. "Come, Potter, hospital wing." Harry let out a sigh of relief as he heard Professor Snape cut through the crowd with Draco by his side. "So can't you just fix it?" Harry asked pleadingly. Snape gave him a sympathetic grimace. "I can heal a fracture, I cannot regrow bones." "I'm going to kill Lockhart," he said. Snape gave him a small smile as he slowly put a guiding hand on his shoulder. "And I will assist you." Harry entered the hospital wing with Draco, Susan, Hermione, Blaise, and Professor Snape with him. "Absolutely not," the hospital matron said when she saw them. "One student can stay with the patient. I doubt he needs an entire entourage." Draco turned towards him, but Susan already grabbed Harry's hand. "I'll stay," she offered. He gave her a grateful nod, and the rest of his friends left after congratulating him again on his win. "Perhaps next time you can catch the snitch without the theatrics," Snape said dryly as his friends trailed out. Harry gave him a cheeky grin. "I'll do my best." Madame Pomfrey bustled over to Harry, and he held very still as she examined him right arm. "You should have come straight to me," she raged, holding up the sad, limp remainder of what, half an hour before, had been a working arm. "I can mend bones in a second, but growing them back—" "You will be able to, won't you?" said Harry desperately. Susan squeezed his left hand briefly. "I'll be able to, certainly, but it will be painful," said Madame Pomfrey grimly, throwing Harry a hospital gown. "You'll have to stay the night." Harry glanced at gown she gave him. "Not a chance," he said flatly. "Excuse me," Madame Pomfrey said, affronted by his refusal. "It's standard procedure, Mr. Potter." "Poppy, surely Potter can wear his own clothes to sleep in," Snape interrupted. "We can sever the sleeve so you can monitor his left extremity." Harry grit his teeth and stared hard at the wall, thankful it was only Susan with him instead of everyone else. He didn't want to look pathetic in front of anyone, weak, but he wasn't going to sleep in a new place in only a gown either, especially with only one useful arm. Anyone could attack him and he'd be at a clear disadvantage. "Fine," Madame Pomfrey sighed. "If Professor Snape will remove the sleeve on your shirt, you may wear what you have on. The robes have to go, though." Harry nodded silently at her as he took off his outer Quidditch robes. Flint would kill him if he cut the sleeve off it anyway. Susan held up his left arm as Snape carefully murmured a spell to remove the sleeve of his shirt. "Does it hurt?" Susan asked softly as Harry resigned himself to climbing in the bed. "No," he said, "but it doesn't do anything else either." "Gilderoy is an incompetent moron," Snape said. "I believe I will be speaking with him about his qualifications to cast healing spells on my students." Susan and Harry exchanged sharp grins at Snape's icy tone. It was almost worth all this if it meant Snape was going to yell at Lockhart. Harry had heard him go off on Gryffindors in their class all the time, and he knew he could be scary when he wanted to. Madame Pomfrey was holding a large bottle of something labelled Skeelgrow. "You're in for a rough night," she said, pouring out a steaming beakerful and handing it to him. "Regrowing bones is a nasty business." Snape scoffed lightly. Potter barely blinked when the Weasleys shattered his arm. This will be nothing for the child. The Skeelgrow burned Harry's mouth and throat as it went down, making him cough and splutter. Still tut-tutting about dangerous sports and inept teachers, Madame Pomfrey retreated, Harry to quickly gulp down some water. Snape excused himself as well, promising to check on Harry if he was still there tomorrow afternoon. "You won though," Susan said with a smile, "and I heard McGonagall give the Weasleys detention for disgusting tactics unfitting of a Gryffindor." The door of the hospital wing burst open at that moment. Filthy and soaking wet, the rest of the Slytherin team had arrived to see Harry. "Excellent, Potter," Flint said with a sharp smile. "Really excellent. Did you see Wood's face? He was furious." Their beaters got detention and they owe Ron a bunch of money, Draco added gleefully, the only clean member of the team. Here, Pusey thrust 2 bottles of butterbeer towards Harry and Susan. Cheers. They had brought cakes, sweets, and more bottles of butterbeer. They gathered around Harry's bed and were just getting started on what promised to be a good party when Madame Pomfrey came storming over. Shouting, "This boy needs rest, he's got 33 bones to regrow, out, out." And Harry was left alone, with nothing to distract him from the stabbing pains in his limp arm. He cleared his mind and focused on his occlumency. Barrier's pain couldn't get through them, until he finally fell into a fitful sleep. Hours and hours later, Harry woke quite suddenly in the pitch blackness and instinctively laid still on his bed, keeping his breath slow and even. He carefully slit one eye open to see what the noise that woke him was. Dumbledore was backing into the dormitory, wearing a long woolly dressing gown and a nightcap. He was carrying one end of what looked like a statue. Professor McGonagall appeared a second later, carrying its feet. Together, they heaved it onto a bed. "Get Madame Pomfrey," whispered Dumbledore, and Professor McGonagall hurried past the end of Harry's bed out of sight. Harry heard urgent voices, and then Professor McGonagall swept back into view, closely followed by Madame Pomfrey, who was pulling a cardigan on over her nightdress. He heard a sharp intake of breath. "What happened?" Madame Pomfrey whispered to Dumbledore, bending over the statue on the bed. "Another attack," said Dumbledore. "Minerva found him on the stairs." "There was a bunch of grapes next to him," said Professor McGonagall. "We think he was trying to sneak up here to visit Potter." Harry's stomach gave a horrible lurch. Surely it wasn't one of his friends. Slowly and carefully, he raised himself a few inches so he could look at the statue on the bed. A ray of moonlight lay across its staring face. It was Colin Creevey. His eyes were wide and his hands were stuck up in front of him, holding his camera. Thank God, he thought, relieved. He would have been furious had it been one of his friends. He thought it was rather fitting he has been attacked if he was on his way here to harass Harry for a photo again. "Petrified," whispered Madame Pomfrey. "Yes," said Professor McGonagall, "but I shudder to think, if Albus hadn't been on the way downstairs for hot chocolate, who knows what might have." The 3 of them stared down at Colin. Then Dumbledore leaned forward and wrenched the camera out of Colin's rigid grip. "You don't think he managed to get a picture of his attacker?" said Professor McGonagall eagerly. Dumbledore didn't answer. He opened the back of the camera. "Good gracious," said Madame Pomfrey. A jet of steam had hissed out of the camera. Harry, 3 beds away, caught the acrid smell of burnt plastic. "Melted," said Madame Pomfrey wonderingly. "All melted." "What does this mean, Albus?" Professor McGonagall asked urgently. "It means," said Dumbledore, "that the Chamber of Secrets is indeed open again." Madame Pomfrey clapped a hand to her mouth. Professor McGonagall stared at Dumbledore. "But Albus, surely, who?" Harry carefully didn't even twitch as he felt a set of eyes land on him. "Has Mr. Potter been here all night?" Dumbledore asked quietly. "Albus, surely you can't place the blame on Potter," Harry was surprised to hear McGonagall say harshly. "You believe it was a coincidence that he publicly threatened Mr. Creevey the same day he was attacked," Dumbledore said. "If every student that Potter threatened was petrified, I believe we would have a castle full of statues," McGonagall said dryly. Harry held in a snort. She wasn't wrong. "The point is moot," Madame Pomfrey said briskly. "Potter has been in bed since the match ended." Dumbledore hummed, sounding unconvinced. "Then I believe the question is not who but is how." Harry had a nasty feeling that the headmaster thought he'd found the suspect, but was only trying to work out how he'd been in 2 places at once. Chapter 11, The Dueling Club. The news that Colin Creevey had been attacked, and was now lying as though dead in the hospital wing, had spread through the entire school by Monday morning. In the weeks that followed, the air was suddenly thick with rumour and suspicion. The first years were now moving around the castle in tight-knit groups, as though scared they would be attacked if they ventured forth alone. Severus encouraged his Slytherins to travel in packs as well. Although Potter remained a popular target for suspicion, it was doing the Slytherin students in general no favours to be associated with the attack. Severus had felt less than useless as he watched Potter shrink before his very eyes. He looked thin, pale, and terribly paranoid. The child was regressing back to his behaviour when he first arrived at the castle last year. He edged around in the corridors and kept his back to the walls at almost all times. More than once, Severus saw him sporting a fresh bruise on his wrists or face. He was certain he was being targeted physically by the other houses, proportionally more than he had before Creevy's attack. He had attempted to speak with Potter multiple times, but the child seemed to be anxious and agitated. "Nothing's wrong, Professor," Potter mumbled. "It's fine." Potter's evasive tactics in the halls had led Severus to be unable to track him down for conversations. He felt pity for the child as he watched his favorite pupil, clearly suffering at the hands of his ignorant classmates. Who would believe Potter was attacking Muggle-borns when he was rarely seen outside the company of Hermione Granger? He had also continuously tried speaking with the other professors to a similar end. "If Potter won't speak up about his attackers, there is little we can do besides monitor the halls," Minerva said with a pained look. Albus remained unmoved in his own convictions. "It is curious that the students recognize the boy as a threat," he'd said casually. "Do you believe they have seen more sides to Potter than we have?" Severus did not believe that. He believed they heard Argus accuse the child on Halloween night, and then heard Potter threaten Creevy in what might be the worst timing in history. He also believed the students were ignorant and despised Potter because they did not understand him. "Draco, remain behind," Severus called out nonchalantly before dismissing class one day after weeks of pursuing other avenues to end the madness surrounding his pupils. Potter glanced up suspiciously, but quickly lowered his gaze back down to table as he quickly packed his belongings. "See you in a minute," Draco murmured to his friends before approaching Severus' desk. "One moment, please," he told him, waiting for the last of the students to trail out of his office. Draco stood in front of his desk, his face blank as they waited silently for privacy. "Yes, sir," he asked. "How are you?" Severus asked him politely. He knew that all the students in his house were feeling the current, very strong anti-Slytherin atmosphere. Draco frowned slightly. "Fine, it's difficult," he said slowly. "Everyone thinks Harry is the heir, so it's a little tense." Severus was relieved. Draco brought the topic up himself almost immediately. "And how is Potter handling that?" Draco's frown deepened at the question. "Not well," he said bluntly. "He's getting in fights almost every day. He's avoiding us. He thinks it's better if he isn't seen walking with us. Even though Susan told him he's being stupid, he still walks by himself. I know he isn't sleeping much, and if it wasn't for that weird elf sending snacks up to the dorms, I don't think he'd even eat." Severus grimaced. He'd noticed Potter picking at his food as he watched the rest of the students vigilantly during meals, when he made an appearance at all. It was hard to begrudge the child his acquaintance elf, if it was ensuring he was eating at least minimally. "Why have I heard no reports of Potter fighting other students?" Severus asked neutrally. He assumed when he saw Potter's daily marks that he would be bombarded with cries from the other professor of his student attacking theirs. "Because Harry isn't fighting them, they're fighting Harry," Draco said. Severus raised a single confused brow at his godson. "I do not understand the distinction." Draco sighed. "They're attacking Harry and he isn't attacking back. It's worse now because they think Harry attacked that Gryffindor kid, so the brave and chivalrous lions are being even more hateful," he finished with venom in his voice. This is why Severus chose to speak with Draco as opposed to Miss Bones, who was undeniably closer to Potter. Draco was an unrepentant gossip, and held no qualms over sharing information with him. "I did not know Potter to refuse an opportunity to show off his silent magic," Severus said dryly. "Why is he doing nothing?" Draco leaned across the desk slightly as he dropped his voice to a near whisper. "He's being watched, Uncle Save, haven't you noticed?" Severus had indeed noticed Albus continued steely gaze on Potter during the meals the child attended. Potter was no fool. He'd clearly already realized that he was the primary suspect behind the attacks in the headmaster's eyes. "Kindly inform Potter that if he has to justifiably defend himself, that he would do best to have Mr. Longbottom as a witness," he told Draco quietly. "Longbottom?" Draco asked with a crinkled brow. "Why?" "Use your brain, Draco," he hissed, not unkindly. "Who better to defend Potter against Gryffindors than another Gryffindor, one whose family is firmly aligned with Dumbledore?" Draco's grey eyes got a light of understanding in them. "You're brilliant, sir," he said breathlessly. Severus smirked as he dismissed Draco. He had spent many years being unfairly targeted by Gryffindors. He thought about the karmic retribution that James Potter was facing, as his son was now utilizing Severus' own tactics against the Gryffindor students. Severus was teaching his first-year Ravenclaw Hufflepuff course when Cassandra Owens, a fifth-year Slytherin prefect, knocked briskly on his door before throwing it open. "Professor, come quick," she called breathlessly. "It's Potter." Severus barked at his class to continue and sighed internally as Lovegood immediately began trailing after him. "You have to hurry," she said softly. "The headmaster has spies on the walls." Severus gave her a brief nod of thanks as he quickened his steps. "What happened?" he barked at Owens. "I don't know, sir. I came in the hall and saw that there were a bunch of kids ganged up on Potter and he just lost it. I think he has a knife. Someone was bleeding," she said nervously. Severus snarled in irritation as he began jogging. "Foolish boy," he mentally chastised Potter. What on earth was he thinking? He rounded a corner and saw Potter did indeed have his knife out and had 4 students, Davies from Ravenclaw, Towney and Finnegan from Gryffindor, and Taylor from Hufflepuff surrounding him. "Freak," Taylor hissed. "Nobody wants you here." The other boys jeered. Finnegan was clutching his left shoulder, which Severus was pleased to see had an open gash on it. Potter took a swing at Taylor with his knife and Severus raised his wand and cast a shield between Potter and the other students. "What is the meaning of this?" he said sharply. The 4 boys spun around and began exchanging guilty looks before they burst into speech all at once. "It was Potter. Potter cut me. He just attacked us. He's completely mad." "Enough," Severus snapped. He inspected each of the 4 boys. Only Finnegan looked to be in need of medical attention. "Finnegan Hospital Wing, now. 25 points from Gryffindor and 2 weeks detention." Finnegan opened his mouth, no doubt to protest, so Severus cut him off before he could. "Do not test me," he hissed. "1 word and it'll be 2 months." Finnegan snapped his mouth shut so quickly Severus could hear it snap. He shot a last glare at Potter, who snarled at him, then took off to the hospital wing. "Davies, Taylor, Towney 25 points from each of you and 2 weeks detention as well." "That's not fair," Davies howled, gesturing wildly towards Potter. "He attacked us with a knife." "Oh," Severus raised a brow at him. "So Potter, a second year, entirely without cause, had attacked you with a knife?" "Yes, sir," Davies said. "We didn't do anything." "So I did not get a report that 4 of you 4 were attempting to attack him." Davies glanced again at his friends, before lowering his head at the venom in Severus' voice. "Get out of my sight immediately," he said to the miscreants. The boys slouched off, not without Towney shouldering Potter on his way though. 4 weeks, Towney," he called after the boy. The aggressors dealt with, Severus now turned his attention to his Slytherin. "Potter," he said softly, "are you with me?" Potter, who was still pale-faced and trembling, abruptly caught his eye and cleared his face so masterfully that Severus was momentarily envious. "Yes, sir," he said tonelessly, pocketing the knife that Severus decided to ignore. He saw Potter glance frantically up and down the corridor, his green eyes wide and vigilant. "Are you injured?" he asked as he slowly moved closer to Potter. The boy looked down and raised the side of his shirt. Severus hissed between his teeth as he saw the ugly bruise in place before it shimmered out of existence. "I'm fine, Professor," Potter said dully as he lowered his shirt back down. Severus studied him for a moment and came to a quick decision. "No, you are not," he said simply. "Walk with me, Potter." "I have charms, sir," Potter said without looking at Severus. "I shall send your excuses to Phileas," Severus told him. "Give me a moment." Severus summoned a parchment and quill, and quickly wrote an excuse for Potter before sending it off. After a moment he recalled the class he had walked out on, and begrudgingly summoned another parchment for one of his Slytherin Newt students. "Kurtz, I am currently busy and require your assistance to cover the remainder of my current class." Snape. Kurtz was an intelligent boy, and had hopes of teaching potions himself one day, despite Severus' advice to do otherwise. He would gladly take over the class as Severus knew he had no class of his own currently. "Done," he said with a flick of his wand. "Come along." "Where are we going?" the child asked quietly. Severus gave him a small and tight smile. "It's a surprise. You'll enjoy it, I'm sure. Your mother did." Potter's eyes got a small spark of life back in them, as Severus had hoped they would, and he trailed alongside Severus obediently. He glanced down and saw Potter's dark hair swinging wildly as the child himself continued turning his head back and forth, undoubtedly watching for other students. "You are quite safe with me, child," Severus said quietly as they ascended the back stairs. Potter let out a thin laugh, cold, humorless, and with a touch of hysteria. "Sure," he said, still continuously checking the corridors. "Safety is something the child has never known." "I was under the impression you owned your father's infamous cloak," Severus said lightly. "Is there a reason you no longer use it?" He was sure that Potter had used it frequently in the halls last year. Potter glanced up at him, and Severus was surprised to see his face was hardened with anger. "They'd like that," he spat. "If I was invisible, then I'm basically gone and they'd be happy about it." Potter shook his head. "No, sir, they don't get to see me disappear." Severus hummed, privately believing that Potter is disappearing already. His humor-filled cheek, his smiles, and the easy way he carried himself at the beginning of the term had already disappeared. He wondered how much more the child could bear before he was no more than a shell. "Stand here," he instructed Potter, as he paced in front of a blank stretch of wall, concentrating on the spot he used to share with Lily. Potter did not even react as a door suddenly came into existence. Severus opened the door and gestured for Potter to enter ahead of him. The child took slow and measured steps as he crossed the threshold before gasping lightly. How did you do this?" he asked breathlessly. Severus smirked down at him, pleased he was able to finally force a reaction from the boy. "Magic," he deadpanned. Potter's lips curved up in just the slightest mimicry of a smile as he gazed around what used to be a room. Currently, it appeared as a much nicer version of the playground Severus used to visit as a child, the place he had first met Lily. "Brill," Potter sighed, stepping hesitantly towards the silver swing set. "I met your mother at a playground similar to this when we were children," Severus told him, walking towards the swing himself. "She was swinging as high as she could, then jumping off and floating to the ground." Potter sat carefully down on the swing and kicked his legs lightly. "Did she know she was using magic?" he asked. "Not until I told her, quite bluntly and rudely, that she was a witch," Severus said with a fond smile in remembrance. Potter gave a ghost of a smile as he slowly swung back and forth. Severus let them swing silently for a few minutes, before beginning what he was sure would be a difficult discussion. "Why are you not fighting back with magic?" he asked Potter, keeping his eyes off the child to minimize his certain anxiety at the topic. "Can't," Potter said after a moment. "It doesn't listen to me if I'm not listening to it." Severus considered all he knew about Potter and the never-before-seen power he wielded. "Most Wixen believe that magic works for them," he said. Potter snorted. "They also believe goblins and elves work for them. Most Wixen are stupid." Severus gave him a nod of agreement. "Indeed they are, Mr. Potter." They continued swinging until it was Potter himself who surprisingly broke the silence. "I keep thinking about leaving," he confessed softly. "I don't need this, you know. They can't take my magic from me. It's mine," he stressed. "Dumbledore could snap my wand and I'd still be a wizard." "You are not incorrect," Severus said slowly, weighing his words carefully before speaking. "However, due to the prophecy you have in your possession, Albus Dumbledore would fight endlessly to keep you within his grasp. I do not believe there would be a place within the magical world where he would not work tirelessly to keep track of you." Potter's legs momentarily froze, before he spoke in what was surely too hard of a tone for a mere child. "Dumbledore needs me as a weapon," he snarled. "I suppose it doesn't matter if I get my ass kicked every day between now and then." "Language," Severus said softly. "But yes, I believe it does not matter one whit to Albus what happens as long as you are alive with enough strength to defeat the Dark Lord should he rise again during your lifetime." "I'm not going to have much of a lifeline at this rate," Potter muttered. Severus gave him a considering look. "You believe the attacks will escalate?" Potter stared straight ahead at the trees that the room obligingly created. "Sometimes I just wonder what the point is," he said quietly. "People here hate me. People outside of here hate me. He sighed quietly. "I just don't see a point to it all sometimes." Severus' heart clenched, and he felt his stomach flip almost painfully as Potter's words registered in his mind. "What did you expect?" his mind whispered. "A lifetime survivor of abuse is bound to wonder why he lives at all." "When you wonder what the point is, you come find me," Severus told him evenly, "and I shall inform you of the many credible points of validity in you living a long, successful, and happy life." Potter gave him a skeptical look, but slowly nodded. "Okay, sir," he said simply. Severus prayed to the spirit of Lily Evans that this child would indeed live to find a point in his life. But until then, Severus would remind him as often as he required. Severus, just the man I was hoping to see. Severus raised his brow at the ignorance of Gilderoy's statement. You are in my office, he said coolly. Did you anticipate finding Phileas? Gilderoy paid no attention to his acidic tone and gave a cheerful chuckle. Of course not, he said with an annoying smile. I just wanted to invite you to assist me on a little project I started. Oh, Severus leaned forward in preparation of denying Gilderoy any favor he may request from him. And what project is that? Well, after the incident with Harry last week, I thought to myself, Gilderoy, how can you help these children channel their rambunctious energy into something more productive? And I came up with the perfect solution. The man was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet as he rambled. A dueling club. I can teach the children how to duel. Severus stared at the man, momentarily struck silent by his idiocy. Your solution to a group of students attacking a student is to teach the children how to duel, he clarified slowly. Exactly, Gilderoy said with another insufferable smile. The children need an outlet, you see, and we can give it to them. Severus raised his brows, unwillingly impressed by the man's sheer audacity. Yes, that's the assistance I wanted to ask you about. Albus approved the project right away, of course, but he said I should find an assistant, as it will undoubtedly be terribly popular with the kids. Severus scoffed and turned back to the essays he was gradding. I suggest Phileas, as he was the world's dueling champion for over 4 years running. Oh, he's busy, Gilderoy said airily, ignoring Severus' clear dismissal. Minerva can't take on any more duties, she says, and Pomona take away any attention from her plants, and Aurora says her sleep schedule wouldn't accommodate a daytime club. Severus unwillingly looked back up, affronted. I was your last choice. Right-o, Gilderoy said, so you see why I need you. Severus stared at him, again finding himself nearly impressed by the man's impenetrable thick skull. Yes, he agreed slowly, I can certainly see why you need my assistance. Wonderful, Gilderoy clapped his hands together. I will see you Wednesday at 7 then, Severus. Severus blinked after the man for a few moments, before he found himself suddenly inspired. A dueling club would require a demonstration. On Wednesday evening, Severus found himself on the side of a makeshift stage, listening as Gilderoy addressed himself to the crowd of gathered students. Now, Professor Dumbledore has granted me permission to start this little dueling club, to train you all in case you ever need to defend yourselves, as I myself have done on countless occasions. For full details, see my published works. Let me introduce my assistant, Professor Snape, Gilderoy continued, flashing a wide smile. He tells me he knows a tiny little bit about dueling himself, and has sportingly agreed to help me with a short demonstration before we begin. Severus nearly growled out loud at the implication that he knew a tiny little bit about dueling. He'd learned at the right hand of the Dark Lord. He could easily kill Gilderoy with as much effort as the man requires to spark a Lumos. Now, I don't want any of you youngsters to worry. You'll still have your potions master when I'm through with him, never fear. Gilderoy gave a jaunty wink out to the students, and Severus felt his lip curl. He caught Potter's eye in the crowd, and saw the boy had a bright smile on his face. It would almost make him look more childlike if it were not for the bloodthirsty look in his green eyes. He smirked out towards his Slytherins. They were eager for a show, and he would happily oblige. Now, in traditional duels, we face each other and bow. Gilderoy did some sort of bow. He waved his arms merrily and twirled his body in a downwards motion. Severus merely jerked his head in show. He would never bow to an imbecile such as Gilderoy Lockhart. Severus raised his wand in front of him with a challenging brow raised. As you see, we are holding our wands in the accepted combative position, Lockhart told the silent crowd. On the count of 3, we will cast our first spells. Neither of us will be aiming to kill, of course. Severus sorely wished he did not require Albus' goodwill to remain free from Azkaban. 1, Gilderoy shouted, raising his wand. 2, 3. Severus waited half of a second for Gilderoy to twirl his wand before yelling, Expelliarmus, and watching with satisfaction as the man was blasted off his feet and into the wall. Severus gave a half smile to the students as he heard his Slytherins cheer. He heard a low whistle and rolled his eyes in Potter's direction. You could take the child off of the streets, but decorum was clearly still a much-needed trait. This is the most lively he's been in months, he thought to himself. Only Potter would come alive at a show of violence. Gilderoy was getting unsteadily to his feet. His hat had fallen off, and his wavy hair was standing on end. "Well, there you have it," he said, tottering back onto the platform. "That was a disarming charm. As you see, I've lost my wand." "Ah, thank you, Miss Brown. Yes, an excellent idea to show them that, Professor Snape. But if you don't mind my saying so, it was very obvious what you were about to do. If I had wanted to stop you, it would have been only too easy. However, I felt it would be instructive to let them see." Severus considered the next demonstration he may showcase more of his own creations, ones that were once popularly utilized freely by the Death Eaters. Possibly, Gilderoy had finally noticed the look on his face because he hastily said, "Enough demonstrating. I'm going to come amongst you now and put you all into pairs. Professor Snape, if you'd like to help me." Severus made towards his second-year students, paying no mind to the wide berth most of the others were giving to them. Draco with Weasley, Zabini and Bones, Nott and Granger, Longbottom and Lovegood. He paired Potter's group off quickly. Potter stared up at him, his mouth slightly open and his eyes narrowed. "And me, Professor," he said curtly. Severus smirked at him. "Do you believe you require yet another lesson in disarming an opponent?" he asked him, reminding the child of his own instructions the summer before his first year. Potter gave him a small smirk back, even as he shuffled slowly towards the edge of the room. "No, sir." Severus hated seeing the child so visibly on edge, even with the spark he had regained in his eyes. It was as if Potter's entire personality had adopted Alastor Moody's screech of constant vigilance. "Walk with me, Potter." He cleared his throat lightly and sent a dark look at the students listening in. "You clearly need no instruction. You may assist me in helping your less fortunate classmates." Potter inched towards his side, his eyes flickering around anxiously. Severus was willing to bet that if the child did not already have an anxiety disorder, to add to the multitude of others he is sure await in Potter's brain, that he would develop one soon at this rate. "One's at the ready," shouted Lockhart. "When I count to 3, cast your charms to disarm your opponents, only to disarm them. We don't want any accidents. 1, 2, 3. Severus pinched the bridge of his nose as noise and chaos immediately erupted around them. "The moment you graduate, I am going to retire," he sighed quietly to Potter. The brat just scoffed. "If I graduate," he mumbled. Severus gave Potter a sharp look, and was preparing to comment on that morbid thought, when he saw a physical fight erupting from Bulstrode and Longbottom, who were not even to be partnered. Severus went to their side and jerked Bulstrode, who had Longbottom in a headlock, backwards. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed angrily. "Longbottom, explain yourself immediately." "Nothing," Longbottom spat angrily, a bruise blossoming on his cheekbone. "Bulstrode insulted Hermione's parentage, sir," Bones chimed in, rolling her eyes at Longbottom. Severus would typically refrain from publicly disciplining one of his own, but Potter was staring up at him quizzically. "Bulstrode, detention for what I am undoubtedly sure was a prejudiced slur against a classmate." Bulstrode bugged her dark eyes at him, but Potter's lips curled up at the edge slightly. The terrifying air of Slytherin champion of Muggleborns. Severus thought the rest of the students must be brain dead to believe Potter was behind the recent attacks. "Dear, dear," Gilderoy tutted, skittering through the crowd, looking at the aftermath of the duels. "Up you go, Macmillan. Careful there, Miss Fawcett. Pinch it hard, it'll stop bleeding in a second, boot." Severus pinched his own nose in blatant irritation. Gilderoy's perfect idea was nothing less than an absolute disaster. All he had accomplished was gaining a horde of students with minor injuries. "I think I'd better teach you how to block unfriendly spells," said Gilderoy, standing flustered in the midst of the hall. He glanced at Severus, whose black eyes glinted in a narrow-eyed glare, and looked quickly away. "Let have a volunteer pair." His eyes wandered around the room, before predictably locking on to Potter. "Ah yes, Harry," he said cheerfully. "We'll just have Harry and Mr. Malfoy." Draco's groan of dismay was audible through the crowd. "A poor idea," Severus said, getting Potter on to the makeshift stage alongside him. "Draco's father would undoubtedly bring the castle to ruins once Potter sends his son to St. Mungo's." Severus gazed out around the room, spotting the looks of fear and loathing that were aimed at Potter. The child needed an opportunity to prove his strength now that he had a venue to do so without punishment. "How about Mr. Weasley?" Ronald's head snapped up quickly. Severus could practically hear his gulp of fear. Mr. Fred Weasley, Severus clarified with a smirk. Potter straightened up beside him, his interest piqued. Severus spotted the gangly fourth year laughing beside his twin, amidst a group of Gryffindors. "Do not react," he whispered quickly to Potter, "as I am confident in your abilities, and am about to do you a favor which requires no repayment." Potter flicked his eyes up at Severus, and cocked his head to the side before nodding slightly. "Bring your brother, let us showcase a paired duel," Severus called, causing the Weasley twins to abruptly end their laughter. Severus, I think that wouldn't be quite fair to Harry here, would it?" Gilderoy asked with a slight chuckle. "Won't he be needing a partner as well?" Severus gave him a bored look. "I believe I understand the abilities of my students more than you do," he said coolly. The Weasley twins joined them on the stage, giving sweeping bows to the crowd. "Now I don't want any of you to worry," one of them said. "You'll still have your heir of Slytherin when we're done with him," the other called, causing the students, aside from Potter's friends, to jeer and laugh. "What's off limits?" Potter hissed, his back straight and his shoulders tense. "Nothing illegal or with long-term injuries. Other than that, I believe it is time you had an opportunity to prove yourself," Severus replied quietly. Potter gave him an appreciative look, apparently understanding Severus' plan. Severus guided Potter to one end of the stage, while Gilderoy ushered the Weasley twins to the other end. "You cannot be formally disciplined for accidentally injuring students during the course of a school-sanctioned dueling club," Severus whispered to Potter as he saw Gilderoy speaking with the twins. "I won't be expelled no matter what," Potter asked back quietly, his eyes flicking around the room to the watching students. "As long as you keep your attacks legal and refrain from serious injury," Severus clarified. "I want these students to see how you are able to fight. Do not limit yourself." He gave Potter a small grin. "I believe the Weasleys are responsible for your recent hospital stay, correct? Feel free to pay back the favor," he murmured. Potter nodded and turned to face the Weasleys. Severus heard many students in the audience whispering about his lack of a wand. He was pleased that the students would be able to witness Potter's power firsthand. Hopefully, this will cease the endless attacks on the child. "Ready, boys," Gilderoy called happily. Harry, no shame in backing down," he winked. Potter cocked his head and gave Gilderoy a thin smile. "I think I'll survive, sir," he said politely. Severus gripped Potter briefly on his shoulder, before backing away and preparing himself to enjoy the show. 3, 2, 1, go, Gilderoy yelled. Potter immediately raised his hand and shot a silent purple spell towards one of the twins. Severus gave a steely gaze around the crowd of now shocked and silent students. Wandless, silent, fast and lethal, he wanted to shout, "Leave the child alone." Potter seemed to enjoy himself as he lobbied and dodged spells from the twins. Severus believed he was toying with the pair. He doubted whether it would take him more than a few moments to incapacitate the two Gryffindor monsters. The Weasley twins, for their part, were a respectable enough duo in a duel. They worked together effortlessly as one defended and the other attacked. While they spoke their spells aloud, no fourth year could match Potter's silent spells. They did seem to communicate silently. Severus watched their faces and saw when they decided to change their tactics immediately. "Serpensortia," one of them yelled, clearly anticipating Potter to be unraveled when faced by a long black viper snake. There were screams as the crowd backed swiftly away, clearing the floor. "Don't move, Potter," said Severus. "I'll get rid of it." "Allow me," shouted Gilderoy, moving before Severus could stop him. He brandished his wand at the snake and there was a loud bang. The snake, instead of vanishing, flew 10 feet into the air and fell back to the floor with a loud smack. Enraged, hissing furiously, it slithered straight toward Justin Finch-Fletchley. A second-year Hufflepuff raised itself again, fangs exposed, poised to strike. Severus was just preparing to dissipate the serpent, then perhaps curse Gilderoy. When Potter made the worst possible decision he could given the current terrible prejudice against him. He exposed himself as a parcel-tongue. Chapter 12, The Heir of Slytherin. "Ignore that boy, attack the redheads behind you," Harry hissed at the snake, amused that Fred and George Weasley thought he'd be scared of a cute little viper snake. As soon as Harry looked up, waiting for the snake to turn back towards the Weasley twins, he was met with the angry glare of Justin Finch-Fletchley. "What do you think you're playing at?" he shouted, and before Harry could say anything, Justin had turned and stormed out of the hall. Harry realized what he had done and felt, as if a bucket full of ice water had been dumped on him. How bloody stupid could he be? I would not advertise your ability to communicate with serpents, as it has not been viewed as a favourable ability by Wixen society in the past. Snape had warned him the first time they met. He said it wasn't smart to advertise. Everyone already thought he was attacking students. How fucking stupid are you? He chastised himself again. Potter, my office, go quickly, Snape murmured as he dissipated the snake. Harry looked around and saw that the students were muttering ominously, and either looked scared, angry, or both. He staggered backwards, and likely would have fell, if it were not for a small hand taking his elbow. Let's go now, Susan whispered. Now Harry, Blaise urged him, hesitantly grabbing his other elbow. Harry allowed his friends to steer him out of the hall, dimly aware that the rest of the group had circled around him. As they went through the doors, the people on all sides of them drew away, as though they were frightened of catching something. Harry cursed himself in both English and Parseltongue, as he was led down to Snape's office by his grimly silent friends. You're a Parslemouth, Draco asked faintly as soon as the door closed behind them. Harry shook off Blaise and Susan's hands as he sunk down into a desk seat. He put his head in his hands and gripped his hair until the pain grounded him back to the current moment. Yeah, he admitted quietly. He didn't bother to look up. He strained his ears so he could make out which ones of his friends, if not all of them, walked out to be finished with him. Why didn't you tell us? Neville asked in a kind voice. Harry let go of his hair and peeked up to see that none of his friends had moved. They were all still loosely gathered in front of him. Because it's dangerous, right? People are going to really hate me now. Ron looked uneasy, but he raised a shoulder and gave Harry a grin in an admirable stab at feigning nonchalance. Not like they can hate you any more than they already do, eh, mates? Hermione smacked his arm and Theo rolled his eyes at Ron, but Harry gave him a nod. Suppose that's true. What did you say to the snake? Hermione asked quietly. Harry shrugged, told it to leave Justin alone and attack the twins. He glanced at Ron and hastily added, sorry. Ron rolled his eyes and gave him another crooked grin. No, you're not. He's definitely not, Luna agreed lightly. The real problem here is that everyone is going to think you're either related to the Dark Lord or that you're Salazar Slytherin's heir, Hermione said with anxiety tinging her voice. And anyone who didn't think you were the heir before is going to think so now. Harry let out a small groan and buried his head again. They're going to kill me, he whispered in a hoarse voice, for once uncaring if his friends saw this moment of weakness. They will not. Harry looked up as he heard Professor Snape enter the room. His face looked severe, and his black eyes were glinting dangerously. Professor, Theo said, jumping to his feet, what happened after we left? Snape sat heavily in his desk, and gave Harry a side glance that told him all he needed to know. Chaos, Snape said, utter chaos. I'm sorry, sir, Harry said, staring down at his trainers. I didn't mean to. I meant to yell in English, I swear. He hadn't even realized he spoke Parseltongue instead of English until he saw the look on Justin's face. Snape nodded. It is no matter now, Potter. Now we plan for the fallout. And what do we do now, sir? Susan asked, reaching out to grip Harry's hand. Snape gave Susan a long look. Harry felt like maybe they were talking with just their eyes, before he blinked and addressed the rest of the room. Potter travels nowhere alone, he said severely. Not only is he a target for attacks, but if there is another attack from the true heir, then Potter will require alibis. He held up a hand as Ron opened his mouth. Non-Slytherin alibis, he clarified. Why, sir? Neville asked him in a soft voice. Snape sighed and flexed his hand in what Harry is beginning to recognize as frustration, because the Slytherins will not be believed when the heir of Slytherin is the one attacking students. The Slytherin boys and Luna, for some reason, all nodded in perfect understanding. Hermione, Susan, and Neville looked surprised. But Professor Dumbledore wouldn't care if Blaise or Theo or Ron or Draco said Harry was with them, right? Hermione said, rambling nervously. He's the headmaster. She glanced at Harry, who just grimaced before she spoke again in a small voice. Right. Indeed, and in a perfect world that should be enough, Snape said, agreeing without agreeing. He turned to Harry and gave him a solemn look. Potter, the time for protecting your friends is finished. You will keep one of them by your side at all times, or I personally will request Lockhart does it himself. Harry snorted at the likelihood of that. Lockhart had avoided Harry constantly, aside from his classes, ever since the Quidditch match. "Do I have your word, Potter?" Harry looked down at the ground, his face flaming as he felt the eyes of his friends on him. "Yes, sir," he grit out unwillingly. "Very good," Snape said. "Then I shall escort you all back to your dorms so there is no outcry of impropriety." Harry stood up reluctantly, unwilling to return to the common room and face the other Slytherins. Susan walked beside him as they trailed to the Slytherin dorm first. "You know what we need," she murmured in his ear. Harry cocked his head towards her, silently inciting her to go on. "A private meeting for the gang," she whispered. "Why?" he asked, keeping his voice quiet as well. Susan gave him a determined look as she squeezed his hand briefly. "We have to find the real heir of Slytherin." Harry nodded at her, impressed. "Tomorrow we'll try and find a time to meet," he whispered. Susan gave him a grin and nodded her head. "Potter, Zabini, Malfoy, Weasley and Nott enter, and do not leave unless it is an absolute emergency," Snape called, gesturing towards the portrait entrance. Susan squeezed his hand once more before letting go as Harry opened the portrait entrance. He had no idea what to expect from his housemates. He gave a look towards Draco, and was touched to see that the blonde had his wand in his hand and a determined tilt to his chin. A glance towards the other boys revealed they all did as well. They all stared in shock at what they found when they entered the common room. Every single Slytherin, from the first years to the graduating Newt students, were standing in formal poses in front of the fireplace. "One's ready," Blaise murmured without moving his lips. "Potter." Alexander Lestrange strode forward and stopped 10 feet in front of Harry. He raised his wand, Harry's friends raised theirs then. Then he dropped it and bowed his head. "I apologize for our feud, Potter. If you ever need anything, you should consider me an ally to you." Harry stared in shock as the rest of the Slytherins, including Pansy Parkinson, bowed their heads respectfully to him. "They think I'm the heir of our house," he thought with a sudden clarity. He looked to his right and shot Ron and Theo a quick look, hoping they would understand what he was about to do. "I'll consider it," he said coolly. "I don't forgive easily." "I understand," Lestrange murmured with his head still bowed. "I hope to prove my worth to you." Harry gave him a cold sneer. "We'll see." He looked around the room and saw that everyone was still in place, with their heads bowed silently. "If there's nothing else, we'll be going to our dorm. Do not bother us," he added on in a hiss of parsley-tongue. Some of the students shuddered at his sibilant hiss, and Harry jerked his head towards his dorm. His friends trailed behind him silently. As soon as the door closed, Ron burst into laughter. "Bloody hell, Harry, you were terrifying," he said. Blaise's eyes were slightly wide and were sparkling with mirth. "That was brilliant, Harry," he said. "I don't forgive easy," absolutely inspired. "They're going to think you're the next Dark Lord," Theo said quietly, climbing into his bed. "I don't care if they think I'm fucking Dumbledore if it means they leave me alone," Harry said as he climbed into his own bed. They all laid in silence for a while, until Harry was nearly drifting off. "Hey, Harry." Harry turned his head towards Draco's bed, where the whispered call came from. "Yeah." Draco turned his head, and his silver eyes met Harry's green ones. "You could be greater than the Dark Lord," he whispered. "You could be the greatest wizard who ever lived." Harry turned to stare up at the ceiling, thinking over Draco's words. "Thanks, Dre," he whispered back. He would be the greatest wizard who ever lived. "If you live," his traitorous mind whispered to him. He occluded his mind and shifted into an uneasy sleep. He was dreading facing the rest of the school tomorrow. The next morning, the first good thing that happened to Harry in a long time occurred. His morning herbology class was cancelled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation she would entrust to no one else, now that it was so important for the mandrakes to grow quickly and revive Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevey. This meant that everyone officially in the gang, with the exception of Neville, was free to meet up. "Ron, go find Susan," Harry told him after they got dressed as they lounged in their dorm. "Tell her we need to meet up, she'll know why." Ron was pulling his boots on when there was a sharp knock on their dorm door. "Potter," Crabbe called in his low voice outside the door, "someone's here to see you." Harry raised a brow at Draco, who scowled. "Who is it?" Draco called. "Dunno," responded Goyle. "One of the birds you're always with, I think." "That's dangerous," Theo whispered to Blaise, who laughed quietly in return. "I'll go see who it is," Ron offered, jumping towards the door. Harry and the other boys waited for a few minutes before their door opened back up and Ron came in, followed by Susan, Luna, and Hermione. Draco looked at the girls with a puzzled frown. "How did you get in here?" Ron laughed and flopped down on the floor. "Mate, Dolohov let them in," he said with another chuckle. "They're so bloody scared of Harry they'd probably give us the robes off their backs." "Don't you have classes?" Theo said, sending a pointed look at Luna and Hermione. "I'm not sure," Luna hummed as she sat on the edge of Harry's bed. "I just felt like I wasn't supposed to be in classes today." Hermione rolled her eyes at the younger blonde as she perched on Blaise's desk chair. "I heard your class was cancelled, and I told Professor Snape I wasn't feeling well." "He fell for that?" Harry asked. Hermione gave him a very uncharacteristic smirk. "He didn't. He told me to try and keep you out of trouble for a few hours." The kids all laughed. Harry could picture Snape's patented smirk as he said it. "Luna, Hermione, I like you," Susan said hesitantly, giving Harry a quick uneasy look. But this is kind of a private conversation." Luna, who Harry was beginning to really enjoy having around, gave Susan a dreamy smile. "We are talking about the real heir of Slytherin, right?" "Luna stays," Harry said clearly. "Hermione and Theo are here and they're not in the gang either. I trust Luna." Luna turned to Harry and gave him a bright smile. "Thank you, Harry," she said happily. "I trust you as well." Harry grinned back and cleared his throat as he felt his face warm up slightly. Luna always knew the right thing to say to him. "Well, Susan says we need to figure out who the real heir is," he said, "and when we find them I'm going to kill them." The boys laughed, but Hermione gave him a pinched look. "You can't kill them, Harry," she said. "We have to report them to Professor Dumbledore." Blaise waved his hand negligently. "We'll decide what to do with them when we find them," he winked at Harry. "Do we have any clues?" Ron asked eagerly. "We have the voice that only Harry can hear," Luna said. The other students, save Susan and Luna, all turned and gawked at Harry. "What voice?" Blaise asked. "You're hearing voices," Draco screeched. "I'm not surprised," Theo muttered, which earned him a quick stinging spell from Harry. "I am not heading voices," he clarified coolly. "I heard one voice on Halloween night right before we found that cat." "And nobody else heard it?" Hermione asked, her brows pulled down in a puzzled look. "Only Harry," Susan clarified. That's not good," Hermione said haltingly. "I mean, hearing voices isn't a good sign, even in the Wixen world." Harry had already worked that out for himself. "What did it say?" Ron asked. Harry thought back to that night. "It said it wanted to kill someone, and it smelled blood." Theo leapt up and surprisingly had a smile on his face. "Well, now we know what the monster is," he exclaimed. The other kids exchanged confused looks, except Luna, who was humming at the ceiling. "We do?" Draco asked. Theo rolled his eyes as he sat cross-legged back on his bed. "Don't be an idiot," he drawled. "Either Harry's completely mad or it's a snake." Everyone stared at Theo as they thought about it. "That makes sense," Hermione breathed. "The monster of Slytherin would be a snake, and if Harry was the only one who heard it, it's because he's the only Parseltongue." Theo grinned at her before smirking at Harry. "Harry may just be completely mad. I'd give it even odds." Ron snorted as Harry sent another painful sting towards Theo. "So how do we stop it?" Susan asked, getting a manic gleam in her eyes that Harry was getting used to seeing. "We don't," Hermione cried. "We tell one of the professors." "We tell nobody," he said, giving them all a glare. "We find out what the snake is, who's controlling it, and we keep it to ourselves." Hermione looked horrified. "But there's a snake attacking Muggleborns," she cried. "We have to tell someone." "So Harry can be arrested as the only known Parseltongue in Hogwarts?" Susan demanded. "No, we shut up and we figure it out. If we say anything now, they'll just think it was Harry." Harry gave her a grateful look. Susan was pretty quick on picking up his exact thoughts. Hermione still looked panicked, so Harry tried to reassure her. "Look, Hermione, if it's a snake then I can talk to it, yeah. And I'm not going to let you get attacked, okay? but I don't want to end up in Azkaban either. Hermione nodded slowly. Okay, she agreed, but for the record I think we should tell someone. Record noted, Blaise said. Now, how do we catch the real heir? The 8 of them discussed it for a while before Hermione's idea of searching the archives in the library for any known family lines with parcel-tongues was chosen as the most likely place to start. You guys all have classes next period, she said, checking her solar wrist watch, so I'll check out the books and bring them to dinner tonight. Harry jumped up and grabbed his invisibility cloak. I'll go with you, he offered. Hermione huffed. You're not going to class, are you? Nope, he grinned at her. It's Lockhart and I might hurt him if I have to hear him blather on today. Hermione rolled her eyes while the other kids laughed. All right then, she conceded. Come on. See you later, Harry called to the other kids, following behind Hermione. Before they exited the Slytherin common room, where Harry was impressed to see nobody even batted an eye at Hermione's presence, he pulled the cloak over his head. Don't talk to me or you'll look crazy, he told Hermione, who laughed at him. It was weird to walk through the corridors under the cloak. He'd done it last year, but last year the halls weren't packed with kids speculating on who Harry was going to petrify next, were they? Hermione was giving rude looks to the groups they passed when she heard his name being whispered. Morons, she muttered. Harry silently nodded his head in agreement despite knowing she couldn't see him. They split up in the library. Hermione pointed him towards a more deserted area. Don't draw attention to yourself, she whispered before going to the section she assigned to herself. Harry started pursuing the shelves, looking for anything that discussed lineage, parcel-tongues, or the history of Slytherin. He had to stop grabbing books and just look at the titles, as a group of the Hufflepuffs who should have been in herbology made themselves at home in the back of the library. Harry inched closer to them, curious about their huddled positions and what kind of secrets they might be discussing. So anyway, a stout boy, Harry thought his name was Ernie Macmillan, was saying, I told Justin to hide up in our dormitory. I mean to say, if Potter's marked him down as his next victim, it's best if he keeps a low profile for a while. Of course, Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let slip to Potter he was Muggle-born. Justin actually told him he'd been down for Eton. That's not the kind of thing you bandy about with Slytherin's heir on the loose, is it? Of course they're talking about me. He should have recognized them as the kids Justin Finch-Fletchy works with in class, and Susan has sat with before. You definitely think it is Potter then, Ernie, said Hannah Abbott, a tall girl with blonde pigtails. Hannah, said the stout boy solemnly, he's a Parselmouth. Everyone knows that's the mark of a dark wizard. Have you ever heard of a decent one who could talk to snakes? They called Slytherin himself Serpent Tongue. There was some heavy murmuring at this, and Ernie went on, remember what was written on the wall, enemies of the heir beware. That first year Creevy was annoying Potter at the Quidditch match, taking pictures of him while he was lying in the mud. Next thing we know, Creevy been attacked. He always seems so nice though, said Hannah uncertainly, and well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. He can't be all bad, can he? Ernie lowered his voice mysteriously. The Hufflepuffs bent closer, and Harry edged nearer so that he could catch Ernie's words. No one knows how he survived that attack by you-know-who. I mean to say, he was only a baby when it happened. He should have been blasted into smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that. He dropped his voice until it was barely more than a whisper and said, that's probably why you-know-who wanted to kill him in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. I wonder what other powers Potter's been hiding. Harry couldn't take any more. Clearing his throat loudly, he whipped his cloak off of himself. He was sick of these kids and their gossip and rumors and lies. If he hadn't been feeling so angry, he would have found the sight that greeted him funny. Every one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though they had been petrified by the sight of him, and the color was draining out of Ernie's face. Hello, he said pleasantly with a sharp smile in place. I thought I'd save you the trouble of talking about me when you could talk to me. We don't want any trouble, Ernie stuttered, and I'll have you know I'm a pureblood. Harry scoffed, I don't care what kind of blood you have, you're an idiot anyway. Ernie pointed an accusing finger at him, suddenly feeling much bolder than he had apparently. Is that the gimmick? You're attacking anyone you think isn't as smart as you. Harry stepped closer to their table and put both hands on it as he leaned down in Ernie's face. If that was the case, then I would have had that snake attack you last night, he said softly. Keep this up and I will next time. He hissed lightly, a nonsensical noise, and smirked as Ernie let out a shriek of fear. "Harry," Hermione called, coming around the bookcase, "is everything all right?" Harry gave Ernie a last cold smile before straightening himself up. "Fine," he said, "just talking to my new friend here." Hermione gave Ernie a thin-lipped frown. "Don't bother my friend," she said, correctly guessing the nature of their conversation. "You don't know anything." "I know you'll be hurt if you keep hanging out with him," Ernie said. "He's attacking Muggleborn's Granger. You could be next." Harry slammed his hand on the Hufflepuff's table and drew on his magic. "Make him shut up." He curled his upper lip at Ernie as he frantically started moving his lips without any sound coming out. "Oops," Harry sighed. "Guess you were next, weren't you?" He turned on his heel and stormed out of the library, earning himself a reproving glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing the gilded cover of a large spell book. He was halfway down the corridor, stuffing his cloak in his pocket and stewing in his anger when he registered Hermione jogging to catch up. "You shouldn't have done that," she panted. Harry looked over at her out of the corner of his eye and thought she looked a little pleased. "He's a bastard and he's lucky that's all I did," he told her darkly. They walked together quietly. Luckily it seemed like everyone was still in class. "Where do you want to go?" Hermione eventually asked. Harry lifted one shoulder in a small shrug. "Dunno, wanna just head back to the dorm." Hermione easily agreed, so they turned along another corridor, which was particularly dark. The torches had been extinguished by a strong, icy draft that was blowing through a loose windowpane. He was halfway down the passage when he tripped headlong over something lying on the floor. He turned to squint at what he'd fallen over and felt as though his stomach had dissolved. Justin Finch-Fletchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. And that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure, the strangest sight Harry had ever seen. It was nearly headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky, floating immobile and horizontal, 6 inches off the floor. His head was half off and his face wore an expression of shock identical to Justin. Harry got to his feet, his breathing fast and shallow, his heart doing a kind of drumroll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the deserted corridor and saw a line of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were the muffled voices of teachers from the classes on either side. "Run, Harry, run now," Hermione whispered in a strangled voice, her face as pale as Nick's. Harry couldn't move, he was frozen to the spot. As he stood there, panicking, a door right next to him opened with a bang. Peeves the poltergeist came shooting out. "Why, it's Potty wee Potter and his itty-bitty girlfriend," cackled Peeves, knocking Harry's glasses askew as he bounced past him. "What's Potter and his girlfriend up to? Why are you lurking?" Peeves stopped halfway through a Medea somersault. Upside down, he spotted Justin and nearly headless Nick. He flipped the right way up, filled his lungs, and before Harry or Hermione could stop him, screamed, "Attack! Attack! Another attack! No mortal or ghost is safe. Run for your lives. ATTACK." Crash, 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 door after door flew open along the corridor and people flooded out. For several long minutes, there was a scene of such confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people kept standing in nearly headless Nick. Harry found himself pinned against the wall beside Hermione as the teachers shouted for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom still had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a loud bang, which restored silence, and ordered everyone back into their classes. No sooner had the scene cleared somewhat than Ernie the Hufflepuff arrived, panting on the scene. Caught in the act, Ernie yelled. Apparently someone had reversed the jinx Harry put on him rather quickly. "Don't you point at him," Hermione said shrilly. "Harry didn't do anything, you ass." "That is enough," McGonagall yelled. "Macmillan back to class now, Granger class, Potter don't move." Peeves was bobbing overhead, now grinning wickedly, surveying the scene. Peeves always loved chaos. As the teachers bent over Justin and nearly headless Nick, examining them, Peeves broke into song. "Oh Potters, you rotter, oh what have you done? You're killing off students, you think it's good fun." "That's enough, Peeves," barked Professor McGonagall, and Peeves zoomed away backward, with his tongue out at Harry. Justin was carried up to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinistra of the astronomy department, but nobody seemed to know what to do for nearly headless Nick. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured a large fan out of thin air, which she gave to Ernie with instructions to waft nearly headless Nick up the stairs. McGonagall turned her attention back to Harry and Hermione. "Miss Granger, I believe I told you to go to class." Hermione, who Harry had never heard talk back to an adult, spoke up harshly. "Harry didn't do this. I've been with him for hours, ma'am." McGonagall gave her and Harry both a frown and shook her head. "This is out of my hands. Come with me, Harry." Hermione leaned in towards him and whispered in a tight voice, "Do you want me to get Snape?" Harry shook his head and whispered back, "No, just," he thought sadly of his little elf who sent him treats every evening, "just go to the kitchen, find Mavis and tell him I'm sorry and to stay here." Got it. He wasn't sure if he was being expelled or imprisoned, or maybe even killed outright, but he'd hate for Mavis to be homeless. It was a miserable way to live. Hermione gave him a bewildered look. "Now, Myone," he whispered harshly. Hermione gave him a trembling look and turned on her heel and took off. Harry and McGonagall marched in silence around a corner, and she stopped before a large and extremely ugly stone gargoyle. "Lemon drop," she said. This was evidently a password. Because the gargoyle sprang suddenly to life and hopped aside as the wall behind him split in two. Even full of dread for what was coming, Harry couldn't fail to be amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase that was moving smoothly upward, like an escalator. As he and Professor McGonagall stepped onto it, Harry heard the wall thud closed behind them. They rose upward in circles, higher and higher, until at last, slightly dizzy, Harry saw a gleaming oak door ahead, with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. He knew where he was being taken. This must be Dumbledore's office. They stepped off the stone staircase at the top, and Professor McGonagall rapped on the door. It opened silently and they entered. Professor McGonagall told Harry to wait and left him there, alone. Harry looked around. One thing was certain. Of all the teachers' offices Harry had visited so far this year, Dumbledore was by far the most interesting. He had a small thought in the back of his mind that if running the ministry wound up not panning out for him, he wouldn't mind being the headmaster of Hogwarts. It was a large and beautiful circular room, full of funny little noises. A number of curious silver instruments stood on spindle-legged tables, whirring and emitting little puffs of smoke. The walls were covered with portraits of old headmasters and headmistresses, all of whom were snoozing gently in their frames. There was also an enormous claw-footed desk, and sitting on a shelf behind it, a shabby, tattered wizard's hat, the Sorting Hat. "Stupid fucking hat," he muttered. "You'll be great in Slytherin, no doubt about it. You were made for that house," he mocked the silent hat. "Look where I am now," he screamed, suddenly furious at the hat. Predictably, it didn't move. Harry backed away, watching it. Then a strange, gagging noise behind him made him wheel around. He wasn't alone after all. Standing on a golden perch behind the door was a decrepit-looking bird that resembled a half-plucked turkey. Harry stared at it, and the bird looked balefully back, making its gagging noise again. Harry thought it looked very ill. Its eyes were dull, and even as Harry watched, a couple more feathers fell out of its tail. Harry was just thinking that all he needed was for Dumbledore's pet bird to die while he was alone in the office with it, when the bird burst into flames. Harry yelled in shock and backed away into the desk. He looked feverishly around in case there was a glass of water somewhere, but couldn't see one. The bird, meanwhile, had become a fireball. It gave one loud shriek, and next second there was nothing but a smouldering pile of ash on the floor. The office door opened. Dumbledore came in, looking very somber. Harry took one look at his grim face and straightened his back. "Show no weakness, this is an enemy." "Sir, I didn't touch your bird and I didn't hurt those kids," he said slowly, holding back the tremble that wanted to show in his voice. "I'll take Veritaserum, or allow you to legitimize me if you'd like proof." Dumbledore ignored his carefully prepared speech and sat down heavily in his ornate desk chair. "Have a seat, Mr. Potter. We are waiting for one of my colleagues," Dumbledore said in a tired voice. Harry hesitated beside the offered chair. He didn't want to sit down, but he didn't want to push his luck either. He eventually lowered himself down to the very edge of the seat. "I didn't do it," he insisted. Dumbledore held up a hand for silence and stared hard at Harry. "I once made the mistake of ignoring my gut instinct before, and a young girl died because of it. There will be no more Myrtle Warrens in this castle, not as long as I remain headmaster." Harry gaped at him before clearing the fear off his face again. "Am I supposed to know what that means, sir?" he drawled. His head was screaming at him to play the poor pitiful orphan that Snape advised him once to play, but his gut instinct said it didn't matter what he said now. Dumbledore had clearly already made up his mind. "I believe you do," Dumbledore said simply before lapsing into silence. Harry stared him down, noticing that the old man didn't meet his eyes at all during this time, as he waited for the colleague Dumbledore summoned. "Please be Snape." When there was a booming knock on the headmaster's door, Harry knew it was much too loud to be Professor Snape. "You wanted to see me, sir." Harry spun sideways in his chair, attempting to keep both the headmaster and the groundskeeper, Hagrid, in his line of sight. "What the fuck? Why is the groundskeeper here?" Harry grimaced in confusion at the turn of events. "Come in, Rubeus, I need you to do me a favor," Dumbledore said politely to the huge man. Harry inched to the edge of his chair to keep away from the other man. He knew that Dumbledore was the bigger threat of the two, but Hagrid looked as if he could crush Harry like a bug with just one hand. Dumbledore turned his blue eyes back to Harry, and he was surprised to see how cold they now looked, almost like ice. "Mr. Potter, I need your wand," he said calmly. "Why?" he asked. "Your wand now," Dumbledore repeated, his voice as cold as his eyes now. "You won't win a fight against him, not right now, not like this." Harry slowly reached into his wand holster to unfasten the wand. He kept his eyes on Dumbledore, who was holding his own wand now. Here, he placed the holly wand on the desk, marveling at the way it shone like it did the day he got it. Dumbledore grabbed the wand and stowed it in his desk drawer, then nodded at Hagrid. "Mr. Potter, you are formally expelled from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. You are a danger to your fellow students, and I cannot allow you to remain here while your very presence puts them at risk. Rubeus will escort you to your home, and your belongings will be sent along at a later time." Harry felt his throat thicken with what was probably unshed tears. He was never going to see his friends again, or Mavis, or Snape. "Show no weakness. Weakness will get you killed instead of expelled." Harry made sure his face was clear of the sorrow he thought he might drown in, and stood as he sensed Hagrid reaching for his arm. "Don't touch me," he snarled at the giant man. He turned back to Dumbledore and stared hatefully at his icy blue eyes. "You're making a mistake." Dumbledore inclined his chin minutely. "I don't believe I am," he said softly. Harry glared up at the man who put him with his relatives in the first place, and who didn't check up on him his whole life, who knew there was a prophecy about him but never said, who wanted Harry to be a weapon in his own private war against Voldemort, who was kicking Harry out of the only home he's ever had, and who was taking Harry away from the only people he'd ever cared about. "When I come back, because I will, I'm going to kill you," he said coldly, figuring he might as well lay all his cards on the table at this point. Harry heard Hagrid give a dramatic gasp beside him, and ignored him to watch Dumbledore's face. His blue eyes flashed with something that looked like shock, before icing over once again. "I'm sure that you will try," he said before nodding at Hagrid. As Harry was led through the flue to Arabella Figg's house, he only had one thought he could focus on, without losing his mind completely. Someday, somehow, Harry Potter was going to make Albus Dumbledore regret this, with every fibre of his being right, before he ended his life.